And away we go. So our sermon this morning is on the respect for the interdependent web of which we are a part. You may recognize this as our 7th UU principle, and it's the one I like to think about, contemplate, hold up when it is Interdependence Day. When it is Interdependence Day, and it's July 5th, so I'm not even co-opting another holiday in case you're offended by that sort of thing. This is a different day. This is now Interdependence Day. So I am going to, because I timed myself on my very in-depth sermon that I wrote, I didn't want to miss anything, but I'm going to follow my notes today. So if you see me not always looking into the camera, that's why, because I wanted to make sure that I could get all of the epic words that I wrote. I think it was a great sermon. But I wanted to do it all within the time I had allotted without thought wandering too much. So let me check these notes and we'll get right onto it. It starts with the saga of Forest Troop. Forest Troop was a troop of baboons in a forest. Researchers in the 1980s were actually studying 2 different baboon troops. One was called Garbage Dump Troop, and one was called Forest Troop. Now, Garbage Dump Troop got the more unfortunate name, sadly, but they got that name because they found at a resort in their nearby jungle, there was a garbage dump that was left unprotected and that they could raid for food at any time they liked. So this was Garbage Dump Troop. Forest Dump Troop also would raid that garbage dump, but they were in competition with Garbage Dump Troop. Garbage Dump Troop had dibs on the garbage dump, and then Forest Troop, only the most aggressive males of the troop would get in there and be able to get scraps from this jungle resort's garbage dump. We're laying the scene here, the saga of 2 baboon troops. So back in the 1980s, one of the reasons why this could happen is that environmental standards were not up to the level that they are today. So you could just have a resort out there with your garbage dump that influenced the behavior of baboon troops, and nobody really batted the eye because, hey, it was the 80s. They probably had mustaches and wavy hair comb-overs and all sorts of wild practices, including open garbage dumps in the jungle. So the sad part of this story is that at some point there was an outbreak of bovine tuberculosis, which is transmissible to baboons. And unfortunately, there was beef thrown into this garbage dump that was infected with bovine tuberculosis, and it wiped out Garbage Dump Troop. Wiped out garbage. They all caught this disease, and the whole troop of baboons was wiped out. Forest Troop, on the other side, this is where our story gets applicable to our subject matter. Forest Troop, on the other hand, only the most aggressive males had access to the garbage dump, and those males were wiped out while the rest of the troop survived. So here's where it gets interesting. What happened in Forest Troop, because these are troops of baboons that were already being researched, is that the female to male ratio was now 2 to 1. There were two. It was a great Beach Boys song in Baboon Land. 2 girls for every boy. So I hear it was a really great time that summer in the jungle, and what happened was that the lower ranked males in the troop, I don't know, I mean, you could look around our current world society and you could see a lot of baboon society, but I'm not sure how much you know, but lower ranked males get picked on and abused by the mid-ranked males, because it's kind of like middle management. If you've ever worked under a middle manager, they get abused by the CEO, and then they carry that abuse out onto their direct reports. So what happened in this troop, though, is that the dominance battles at the top kept happening, but the abuse of the lower ranked males stopped when the ratio, because the competition for mates was changed by the ratio of female to male baboons. And then everybody was just like, they were a little more chill. They were like living in a baboon beach boy paradise. Wow, try saying that 10 times fast. Baboon beach boy paradise, baboon beach boy paradise, etc. So, and the last part of the story for now is that the researchers found that the change was so dramatic that it actually changed the endocrine system of these lower ranked males, that their output of stress hormones was dramatically altered throughout their lives because of this change in the structure of their society. This is a short episode in the saga of Garbage Dump Troop and Forest Troop. Okay, what does this have to do with anything? Well, this story is offered first as an interesting example of interconnection, of complexity. Because in the 80s, jungle resorts were not eco-friendly like they are today, the garbage disposal practices wiped out an entire troop of baboons. But even more interestingly, by changing one element of another troop's society, it rippled all the way down into the endocrine systems of its members. So we could find tons and tons of examples like this in nature, where you pluck one thread of the sweater and the whole sweater gets plucked as well. There's no part of the sweater that you can pluck that doesn't pluck the whole thing. Then as well, we might ask, where did the process start? Did it start with what motivated people to set up a jungle resort? Did it start with the upbringing and class of the tourists? How did the beef get infected? We could also ask, where did it end? The book I read didn't say, but we could ask, did this behavioral influence continue on in that troop into the future? Did it percolate out into other baboon troops? These are the kind of interesting questions that come about when you contemplate interconnectedness. These are connections without beginnings or endings. It's connection after connection. You heard the joke, right? The man comes to a great rishi and asks, I've heard that the earth is traveling through the cosmos on the back of a great elephant. The rishi says, oh yes, that's true. And then he asks, I have a question for you though, O wise sage. What is the elephant standing on? And the rishi says, it's a very simple answer. The elephant is standing on the back of a great turtle. And the guy thinks, thank you. I knew you were so wise and learned that you would be able to tell me what the elephant was standing on. And he pauses for a minute. He comes back. After thinking for a moment, he says, but I have another question, Rishi. What is the great turtle standing on? And the Rishi says, I knew this question would come. The great turtle is standing on the back of another great turtle. I knew I chose a wise sage to bring my questions to. Pauses for a minute, very satisfied. Then his brow starts to crinkle. But Rishi, one more question. The Rishi says at this point, he says, let me stop you right there, my child. It's turtles all the way down. It's turtles all the way down. Okay, so we get these, there are no beginnings and no endings in the type of questions we're asking. And the wonderful thing is that contemplating this can be enough to induce wonder. Contemplating the interconnected roots of an ancient forest, or the epigenetic changes passed on to grandchildren because of the economic conditions of their grandparents, it's a situation that goes beyond our mind's capacity to grasp in its entirety. And so wonder can be induced. Perhaps this is why interdependence is enshrined for us UUs in our 7 principles. As a Buddhist, I can tell you that there also interdependence is among the highest objects of reverence. The simple fact of our interconnection and the degree of intricacy and complexity that our concepts will never fully comprehend. Perhaps it's about what all religions offer, feeling you're part of something bigger than yourself. Or as Brene Brown's research found, that spirituality for most people implies a sense of inextricable connection that unites us. A sense of inextricable connection that unites us. So, right, what do you think online, class? Thumbs up. Interdependence, wonder-inducing, Complexity, oh, so trippy, takes me outside of my, man, how big are things? How weird are things? That's cool. Let's enshrine it. Let us enshrine this. Okay, but there's always a but. Like all things, interdependence is not all flowers and sunshine. If you're a low-ranked male in the forest troop, it turns out pretty good. 2 girls for every baboon boy. But not so for the members of garbage dump troop. Contemplating how the water has etched the rock at Yosemite can induce a beyond ego state. But contemplating the changes in the water cycle due to climate change can induce a panic attack. In normal times, it feels good to affirm that we are all connected through the web. But what about pandemic times? Times when it doesn't matter so much how powerful your immune system is, because collective dynamics are going to dramatically affect your life and that of those you love. It's not enough to say, we believe in the interconnection that binds us all together. That's not always a relief. Of course, our UU principles are not beliefs, but practices. And in this case, it's not the principle is not just the interdependent web. Fin, right? It's actually respect for the interconnected, interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. We covenant to affirm and promote respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. That's beautiful, I think. It leads us each day to ask, am I respecting the web? And asking that can give us a bit of a compass in an otherwise chaotic world. So there's some grounding. If we know our principles, we can get grounded. Oh, geez, what am I going to do today? Well, you could ask, am I behaving with inherent worth and dignity? Am I promoting free and responsible searches for truth and meaning? Am I working toward a goal of world community with peace and justice for all? Am I respecting the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part? Okay, but another question should come up, and that is, this is the meat or the tempeh of our sermon today. What about everyone else? So I've got a compass. Hooray! Now I can navigate. Am I respecting the web? Woo! An otherwise chaotic world, but I know what I must do. What about everyone else? Those who don't respect the web. Let me see your face if you don't mind. Has this quandary occurred to you? You know, you wake up, hey, I respect the web, and then you look on the news or something, and then uh-oh. It's kind of like it's not quite good enough to just have your own compass some of these days. See, Joey's answering me. That's really nice. Or eating cookies that looks like talking. Okay. If I'm honest, this has been a sticking point in my own practice of these principles. I personally held this principle before I was a UU, because in case you didn't hear me tell you before I was even a Buddhist, I was a tree-hugging druid. And we tree-hugging druids love the interdependent web of all existence. We dig it. It's the best. And in my own experience, I got a lot of mileage out of my own respect for the interconnected web. I really loved having that compass. But for me, around the time when the fallout from 9/11 was starting to calm down, you'll remember this, things started to calm down, and then you heard in the distance, what was that? It's the drums of war. That's right. People started to tend toward reconciliation and bring themselves back. And so we sounded the drums of war and of Islamophobia so that we could march ourselves off to take care of the weapons of the mass to something and the others and those who are not like us. And a great outcry was brought about the land. And these were marshaled as a major political tactic to aim our cultural hate at outsiders. The relief I experienced from knowing about the web began to wane. And I'll admit to you, I got depressed. I got depressed for a number of years. I'm kind of a sensitive soul that way. it was a kind of breaking point in my belief that if I personally respected the interdependent web enough, then things would turn out okay. I share this personal tale not because I think that some of you share that exact history, although I wouldn't be surprised if a couple of you do, but rather because I think that the challenge comes to many of us just the same. The challenge is this: no matter how ethical or caring my way of life is, what do I do about those who do not hold similar values? Because of our interconnection, their choices affect me just as much as mine affect them. So let me look at you for a minute. Does this question, does this inquiry ring true for you? Is it just us sensitive souls over here at my house who are like, yeah, you know, whatever with those guys? No, I think there's something, if you deeply respect the interconnected web, then there's a whole thing of like, well, what do we do about everybody who doesn't? This is a real problem here. And this thing of like, for me, 5 years ago, going into the UU church and going, we respect the interconnected web, there was much more relief in that, just to affirm it together, than there is right now. So I think we got to ask what in the heck we do about that. Okay, part 2. I don't need to describe to you the butterfly effect. Well, because Dave put it in a song for us, so that did me some work. Check that off the list. Thank you. And you've either already heard of it or can look it up on the internet after this sermon. But I can simply say that, like it or not, we are all in this together. Like it or not, we're all in this together. Our UU principles don't say that we have to like it, but they encourage us to respect it. This is my favorite word that I learned the etymology of this week, respect. It actually comes from Latin roots that mean to look again. And I never knew that. Respect. Oh my gosh, to look again. So, and it's really interesting because it has different connotations, right? You can respect a world leader who, like a little while ago, we had a world leader that finally helped to push for finally decriminalize gay marriage in the United States. And I thought that was pretty respectable of a thing to do, right? And that's a kind of respect where you're like, yeah, I like them. I respect that. And then you also have respect for a formidable opponent, which means you don't necessarily like them, but you know the skills they're going to bring to bear against you. And so they're worth a second look. They're worth looking to, you better respect that formidable opponent. So your respect for their skill is a type of wariness. They're worth a second look. But respect, when it comes down to it, is the key to using our interconnection to benefit us rather than us merely being at its mercy. Dr. Dan Siegel, in his book, The Neurobiology of We, lays out the problem, saying, the tendency of the delusion of separateness confused with identity is killing our species. Massive consumption, mistaking materialism for meaning, the delusion that what we do doesn't matter, that he who dies with the most toys wins, this is a serious problem for our whole species. I like it so much, I'm going to read it to you again. The tendency of the delusion of separateness confused with identity is killing our species. Massive consumption, and then highlight this, no, not that one yet. Mistaking materialism for meaning. Okay, highlight this one. The delusion that what we do doesn't matter. That he who dies with the most toys wins. This is a serious problem for our whole species. And how do we answer this? That particular problem comes from our quote from Einstein that we read at the beginning, who says, our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circles of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. Widening our circles of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. It's not enough, though, just to dwell in this wider circle by ourselves, our well-meaning UU congregations. It doesn't feel complete. So how do we get others on board? This is the question that began to sing in me as I sat down to compose this sermon, right? This is often how I do it. I've mentioned this before. I hope you don't mind my process share, but like the name of the sermon will sort of come to me in this ministerial magic. It says, "Oh, Interdependence Day." So, oh, okay, send it to Lance, and he puts it in the thing. And then I have to figure out what I'm supposed to write about on that topic. And when I sat down for this one, in my mind, it said, here's the deal, bro. Interdependence is cool, but then there's all of these homies who don't respect the web. What are you going to do about that? So this began to sing in me as I sat down to compose this sermon. The question, what makes it so that some of us are hard bent on denying the interconnectedness right in front of their eyes? We know it's true, but what makes that happen? This denial of the interdependent web is what underlies, I propose to you, underlies climate change denial, systemic racism denial, wealth inequality denial. It's the inability to see that we are all in it together. So this led me down a rabbit hole. I read 3 books this week in preparation for this sermon. And in my studies this week, one was Interpersonal Neurobiology. That's the book from Dr. Siegel that I highly recommend. Also things like How People Get Embroiled in Cults, and with that, Cognitive Dissonance, as well as how empathy is developed or not developed in children and adults. Empathy is going to be a focal point here. Why empathy? Because it seems to be the common denominator. Empathy is our felt sense of interconnection. It's the part of us that knows we're connected. It's what's functioning in you that makes you wonder at the interconnectedness of this web. It's the part of the same circuitry of the brain that gives a sense of meaning beyond just your own individual life. The medial prefrontal cortex, by the way. Beyond your individual life, your individual good, and broadens the sense of self to embrace an ever-widening circle of humans, animals, and even ecosystems. This empathy and intuition of connection is something we humans are wired for. We're literally born for love and connection. And like the old school hierarchy of needs showed us, when our belongingness needs are met, we can move on to such needs as self-actualization and even self-transcendence. We can go beyond our sense of a limited self. But it's a two-way street, because when belongingness needs are not met, when we're physically threatened or deprived, our brains route energy toward personal survival or at most tribal survival. We circle the wagons, we hunker, oh, I think that might be a racist trope, sorry about that. But we hunker down into our bunkers, that's every culture around the world hunkers into their bunkers and lobs bombs at each other, and we lose sight of our underlying unity. We batten down the hatches and we lose sight of our underlying unity. The interesting insight I learned this week about how cults work is that cult leaders often create unstable environments on purpose. They try to destabilize a potential member, put them on shaky ground, because they figured out, what scientists have now figured out, that we humans are hardwired such that when there's an emergency, we look to whoever has assumed a position of leadership, and we automatically tend to follow whoever has taken leadership when there's an extremely stressful situation. Uh-oh, this has been selected for through evolution since the early dawn of our primate ancestry. We do that, and we double down when we're endangered to route power from the tend and befriend circuitry of our brains to the fight or flight circuitry of our brains. This is similar to how cognitive dissonance works. I bet some of you may have had the pleasure of engaging in a phone call or an internet conversation where you encountered cognitive dissonance. Is it true? Have you noticed one of these lately? Maybe you've been a witness to it. And what's the cool thing about cognitive dissonance? It's this magical substance that the harder you hammer it, the harder it gets. Isn't that, like if we could tap that scientifically, man, we'd have that like that Black Panther armor that like it absorbs the kinesthetic force and just turns it into more better armor. That would be amazing. Well, you can do that with your mind. I don't recommend it, but that's what cognitive dissonance is. It's a thing that the harder you hit it, the more you hit it, the more entrenched it gets. Okay, we're in the home stretch, you guys. From the book, The Empathy Effect, the author says, we know that for people to feel empathy toward one another, they can't be in a constant state of emotional distress. They can't be open to what others are experiencing when they are expending all their efforts managing their own stress hormone levels and fight or flight responses. It's impossible to feel empathetic while you're managing all of this distress within. So I don't know how the world looks to you, but I personally am seeing a lot more fighting, flying, freezing, and fawning, mostly on the internet because I'm sheltering in place, than I am seeing tending and befriending in the world. I'm seeing a lot more fighting, mostly fighting, than I'm seeing tending and befriending. And if we wanted people to be able to experience the interdependent web, if we just wanted the possibility of that wonder which you use, respect, hold up, and enshrine, we would have to be doing more tending and befriending than fighting or flying. We'd actually have to be doing, if Gottman's research is true, we'd have to be doing 5 times more tending and befriending than fighting or fleeing. Wow. And this even happens to well-meaning UUs. This even happens to well-meaning UUs. We fight and fly instead of tend and befriend because if you look at the world, it's stressful. Stress hormones make empathy hard, and we begin to look at the world and think, uh-oh, what's next? Rather than thinking of the wonders of complexity, and rather than thinking of those most magical 3 words you can say. You know the 3 words, don't you? The most magical 3 words. No, not I love you. Not the coffee is ready. Nope. Not, oh, the coffee's ready. Sorry, Dave. Thank you. And not I ordered pizza. Ooh, I was wrong. That's getting closer. The 3 words I'm asking today are, wait. No, it was 4 words. Anyway, I want you to ask, how can I help? I don't know where my brain went. And in all of those books I read, I lost track of how to count words. But anyway, we should ask. It was worth a joke for my I made coffee though, huh? Oh, can I help? That's, may I help? Anyway, I like how can I help? But we'll get back to my math and grammar skills later. And there we are. But we want to ask, how can I help? When we recognize our belongingness, perhaps even relish the spiritual feeling, the spiritual, quote unquote, as in Brene Brown's research, of intuiting something bigger than me that unites us all. And when we ask from that state of being, what is mine to do? I believe that this is when we feel the most alive. But if this is so hard right now for even well-intentioned UUs, how hard must it be for people who don't have a call and a covenant to affirm and promote respect for the interdependent web? How hard must it be for folks who don't even have that enshrined? What about, as some of the research shows on those who vote more conservative rather than more liberal, what if your brain tends to see threat aversion, tends to see threat more readily, and your adrenals are more threat aversive in how much stress, how hard is it then to generate empathy? What if instead of you, well, we're all listening to news that says, if it bleeds, it leads. But what if you're imbibing plenty of the threats of the world as the primary focus? Not how can I help, not what can I do, not how are we connected, but you are under threat. How hard is it then to have the slightest intuition of our interconnection? So the question I want to ask together is, to all of us who have this covenant, is how have we helped these folks, the non-believers, come to a state where empathy is even possible. We who respect interconnection but bemoan that lack of respect from others, what have we personally done to create the safety and connection that such respect cannot grow without? The truth of our interconnection is that you are more powerful than you know. Our human brains are so delicately tuned that we can pick up the barest moment of disgust or contempt in the facial expression and tone of voice from another. And each of these barest moments is a wedge driven into our possible belongingness and sensed mutuality. Need we even mention what happens when we actively belittle another or make them part of the outgroup? My call to you today is weighty, but fortunately straightforward. That if you respect the interconnected web, then it is upon you to promote tending and befriending more than fighting, flying, freezing, or fawning. We could go on in our personal relationships to employ the same kind of punishment policies that keep our prisons full and our military budget fuller. Or we could decide to become true witnesses of our UU faith, to hold fast to the deep belongingness, the sense of community and unity that we long for, and to hold our actions, speech, and thoughts to that high standard. We must behave this way toward the other team because in truth, there is no other team. As Dr. King taught us, we are caught up in a network of mutuality. The good news is that this means your effectiveness is theoretically infinite. The crinkle of your eyes in a Duchenne smile, that's the not fake smile. I'm going to try to do one for you. Here, see the eyes crinkle. It's like, I love you, and it comes right. I love you. Okay, maybe those are the best 3 words you can say because my other one was a 4-word. Okay, the crinkle of your eyes in a Duchenne smile could be the butterfly wings that start a cascade of empathy that transforms relationships across our entire globe. There's no way to know which act of love will change the world for the better. But understanding our interconnection, we can know that acts of love are the only thing that will make this healing change. I call to you today to recognize your potency and power in this interconnected web. You have the capacity to create the soil in which empathy can grow. Without this heartfelt sense of our connection, our only path is ever widening division. But with your efforts to do what it takes to be able to tend and befriend, especially when it's hardest, you can create a ripple effect that sweeps the entire planet. Jesus famously said, "You must love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you." Now, he may have meant something much more mystical than I read in it today, but what I read is immediately practical. In a web of interconnection, we're all sharing the same well. You can't poison any of us without poisoning us all. So love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you because you're loving and praying for yourself. I'd love to finish by reading to you my favorite of our readings in our UU book, which is Dr. King's Network of Mutuality. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. There are some things in our social system to which all of us ought to be maladjusted. Hatred and bitterness can never cure the disease of fear. Only love can do that. We must evolve for all human conflict a method which rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation. The foundation of such a method is love. Before it's too late, we must narrow the gaping chasm between our proclamations of peace and our lowly deeds which precipitate and perpetuate war. One day we must come to see that peace is not merely a distant goal that we seek, but a means by which we arrive at that goal. We must pursue peaceful ends through peaceful means. We shall hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. Thank you all for being present for our sermon this morning on celebrating our interdependence. Let me